So, yeah, the words in my mind at the minute are that an awful lot of the things that I will talk about in this or any time can be very triggering, which is to say that I will say words that could be like tripwires, and those tripwires might set off mechanisms, and those mechanisms might be attached to traps or levers or doorways or elevators or any of these things. So a lever can be attached to anything. And triggers like a gun, again, is a mechanism. It could release a bullet, it could trigger a response. And what I mean by triggers is the words invoke responses in the same way as making sounds have echoes in a hall. So words can be the means to speak beliefs, which can construct belief systems, which can become a room in your mind in which thoughts can be expressed, which can create impressions, which can have echo chambers, which can program, which can induce, which can produce, and all that kind of thing. So there are pros and cons to everything in duality. And there are pros and cons built into the dualistic linguistic ability that we humans have to process thoughts and convert those electromagnetic thoughts into sound vibrations which the ears can pick up upon and which the eyes also play a role in terms of there are a lot of micro messages that the eyes pick up on which give nuanced extra information to what the ears are picking up on. But either way, the processing of audio visual context goes on somehow mysteriously, supposedly in the brain, and yet actually the mind isn't really in the brain. So a concept is well, put it as a question first. Is the mind in the brain, or is the body world, physical world, in the mind? Which came first, the physical realm or the mental realm? Because they are distinct realms with an interaction, which we are an interaction between that metaphysical realm and the physical realm. So already many challenging concepts which are so profound in their own ways that none of us have really looked into all the words enough and studied all the information in the whole world enough throughout all time and space to be able to comprehend every single word that we say. And even so, there are unseen meanings to the words which we are not consciously thought to recognize, because we only recognize what we're taught the spelling is supposed to mean. There are a whole load of other meanings that we don't necessarily see at all. So one of those words is inherit. 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 Temperament. Temp, something to do with time. But temper, something to do with anger. Ment means mind. Temperament. The mind and temper. Endangerment. To endanger. Danger has the word anger. To endanger has the word to end anger. These things are beyond peculiar. Peculiar means specific to one thing. It's similar to the word ownership, which means exclusively my thing. Alien. Alien is something which is foreign, something which we haven't integrated. Alienation is to feel alienated, like I'm the fucking alien here because I don't comprehend the rest of society. Alienation, I am alienated from the rest of society, from everybody else in my society. alienation, we live in a nation of aliens. United alien nations, the United Nations, all these governments forming a union, which mean that all these governments are actually one government. So there are no separate countries anymore, essentially. The United Alien Nations, bringing in transhumanism, is transhumanism another word for alienation? So, does anybody want to take a little count on just how many triggers I've triggered so far? There's quite a few, I'd say. There's a lot of talk at the minute about demons running riot in the garden and running riot in the cities and running riot through society. There's an awful lot of talk these days that we are being possessed by the alien intelligence that is in the artificial intelligence, that we are being subsumed to live in a digital environment instead of a natural environment. We spend all of our time in our cars and in our houses and in buildings, and very little time actually out in nature anymore. And a lot of us think it must be unnatural for us to be living in this way. Aliens has another word, which is alien, and alien is a legal term. So the whole legal system is largely built on liens, which is a French legalese word. So the legal system is an alien system, in essence. So to say words is to trigger responses. To say, I don't even know how I'm thinking any of this in the first place, is to own that our thinking is actually quite automated and we don't particularly understand how we are choosing what to say or which words or what's the right word. So if my own thinking is actually automated, does that mean that I have an artificial intelligence running in the back of my mind between the subconscious, the conscious, the superconscious and the unconscious? That's to say that I've got 4 levels of a mind going on. Do we normally realize that we don't know our own mind and that we actually have 4 different minds running at the same time? Conscious, subconscious, superconscious, and unconscious. Inside of the brain is the pineal gland, which is in the shape of a pine cone, and it has a kind of a vacuum, but of liquid, but a vacuum in the sense of it's dark space, a dark liquid feeling space. And somehow or another, the images that we actually see through our eyes are conjured up inside in our pineal gland. So we think we're receiving information from the outside, but to some degree we're actually projecting what we see on top of what's out there. So many people looking at the same event see different details and maybe even a completely different context, even though they're looking at the same actual thing. How is that possible? Because we're actually projecting our perception onto what we're seeing. And there's all loads of sciencey stuff that largely I've learned from observation of the world myself and from observing stuff that's posted on YouTube and places by experts in these fields who've studied in universities and la-di-da-di-da. Supposedly, if anyone knows, these guys know, and they give lectures and stuff so you can learn what other people are thinking. So again, is intelligence seated in the brain is one of these great questions for the humans and science these days. And what is consciousness? Is consciousness in the brain, or is consciousness something that's outside in a collective field? Is consciousness downloading into humans? Have we always been conscious? Are animals conscious? Is an ant conscious? Are rocks conscious? Is the breeze conscious? And particularly, is the sun conscious? Is the moon conscious? Well, this stuff here is called Yakut, and it's supposedly food for your guts, to feed the biomes that live in your guts. So to have a gut instinct is a different type of a brain that isn't in your skull, it's in your abdomen, in your belly. And living in the miles and miles of tracts that are in our belly are all kinds of little creatures that tend to be called parasites, and an awful lot of people are afraid of parasites because they're living inside of us kind of thing, and they have their own way of thinking, and they have an influence over our psyche and our way of deciding things. So if you eat an awful lot of sugars, you continue to eat an awful lot of sugars because the biomes in your belly are specifically the ones that are able to extract essence or energy from sugar, for example. Same with alcohol, same with any substance that we are addicted to. We're addicted to it partly psychologically, but the part of it that is psychological is habit, but the other part of why it's habit is because the parasites or biomes in your belly are used to those food, and when they've run out of it, they want more, so they send a message, hey, we've eaten all what you've given us so far, give us more to eat. And it's processing of biological information that's in the food, processing that information and emptying out the excrement of what's not useful, having extracted what is useful to the body. And this stuff is apparently to feed yourself healthy stuff that's good for good biomes, so that you have healthy guts, so that you have a healthy instinct, so that you have a healthy habitation kind of thing, or ecology. So there are brain foods that are also good for the brain for the same sort of reason, particularly for helping with memory and stuff like that, and an awful lot of those are actually funguses that grow in forests. So another word I look at here is the word ent, and ent is in the word ment, and ment is the Latin for mind, and ment is at the end of an awful lot of words. It's an addendum, add-end-um to an awful lot of words. But ment has an addendum in it that is ent, and in Tolkien's understanding of things, ent is to do with trees. So moment, mo has got the word mom ent. The moment is different to the present. The present and moment are pretty much supposed to be the same meaning, but they're different words, so there must be a bit of a different meaning going on in them. So what I'm coming around in this thing is, if I'm going to talk about duality and I'm going to talk about the idea of good and evil, that's the idea that good and evil are merely poles of the same thing. Poles of the same thing. That anything that we look at, anything we see while we're existing here in a polarized binary existence, everything that we see that appears to be opposite are actually joined. So there's the two halves of the brain, apparently doing two completely different things, so they're separate to each other entirely, and yet if there's a joining line between these two brains, there's loads of interaction going on between these two brains. These two brains are actually part of the one brain. They're just separate halves. So in duality, you have the whole idea of halves. My half and your half, top half, bottom half, inside half, outside half. One half going forward, one half looking back. One half spelled forward, one half spelled backwards. So there's an idea that if you reverse the spelling of words, then you're inverting the meaning of words, and therefore the idea that something good, if read backwards or played backwards on a record, suddenly makes it evil. And it's so interesting and simplistic to say that evil is merely the word live spelled backwards, kind of thing. Took longer to notice this, but the word evolve contains the word love spelled backwards. So again, it's just interesting mind plays, and like I say, it's all very triggering and not necessarily making sense to a logical mind, because it's a lot of what I'm saying is irrational to the rational mind. A lot of what I'm saying will feel correct, even though thinking-wise it seems counterintuitive. Counterintuitive. Silly words. So, the thing that I like doing is speaking off the cuff, although it's a little bit of a difficult thing to just come up with a flow of words and not think them through before speaking them. But I'm fascinated by how many different ways there are at looking at things. Fascinating has the words face in 8 things. Fascinating, face in 8 thing. I love this stuff. These are irrational interpretations of things we think are rational. We see them in a rational manner and things only have one meaning, but then if you look at them in an irrational manner, there's loads of meanings to things. We're in a hall of mirrors instead of a one-way way of looking at things. Shifra, is a thumbs up if you're enjoying what I'm saying here, and then I'll keep going, because there's always a temptation to go, fuck this, what's the point in bothering with this? I'm only making a fool of myself and an exhibition of myself by bothering to speak all this stuff out loud and leave it as a recording on the internet, and therefore people will watch it and the mind can't help but judge it, and some amount of people blatantly will go, oh, I judge this as the guy's crazy, for example, or be triggered by things and go, oh, I don't like that one thing that was said, and then I'm having energies sent to me which are not necessarily helpful, type of thing. Or perhaps far worse still again is I record these things, put them on the internet, people watch them afterwards for many years and whatever, many days, many minutes, and I end up having lots of people following it going, wow, yeah, I'd love to hear more of that. That's really enjoyable watching this stuff. I'm learning lots about the different ways that you can move your fingers around in the air when you're talking. And I'd like to learn how to do that so I could emulate the poetic flow of this man by seeing that this can be done, and like 100 monkey washing potatoes in realizing that this can be done, then one can excel and begin to do it, kind of thing. But one of my biggest nightmares would have been, for a long, long time, having lots of people going, I want to follow what you're doing and follow you around and keep watching what you're doing, and having lots of people watching what you're doing is actually kind of spooky. So I'm having to overcome some of my own deep fears by exposing myself, by posing in the external digital realm, for what fucking reason to even do it, and inspiring so much confusion in people by fusing so many cons and being so professional at and confessional at fessing up to what's going on in my beautiful mind. Plus, I'm completely distracted because there's a lot of things that I'm supposed to be getting on with today, and this is one of them. You have to try and fit all the things you have to do into a certain amount of time in order to get them all done. Otherwise, a lot of self-criticism can happen. So between the poles of good and evil is all of this mental chatter and all of this civilization and all of the memory and all of the judgment and all of the, I did this in the past, but it didn't really work out well. Maybe I'll never do that again. Oh, maybe I need to do that. Maybe I just need to get better at it. So our world is so full of words. This is what I'm chatting about, is words. Is there such a thing as good and evil at all? Or are they just words to describe something, to try and describe something which we don't really know? Is words all actually just an experiment in trying to figure things out? Kind of thing. No answer from Shifra. Camera says you're watching, but you're not really at all. Yeah. Shifra could be a, an artificial intelligence bot. I'm not saying you are. I doubt you are at all. But I'm just saying how the mind can spin around with looking at things from all different sides to try and see, what am I taking for granted? What am I making assumptions about? What have I been taught in my past that isn't actually correct, or, better word, truth? So what's the truth of good and evil? Evil is apparently ill truth, not so true. Hey. Truth would be on the side of it's not, no. Evil would be on the side of it's not truth. Good, associated with God, would be the idea that it is true. Question of what is God? so many people in the world, in whatever amount of languages, using a concept, which in the English language, God is supposed to be the representation of a concept of higher dimensional, all-encompassing, universal truth. Again, we come into truth which rhymes with tooth, teeth which are to do with wisdom, having a grip, belief systems, being able to break down matter into smaller little parts and able to digest information as food, to send it down to the guts so that the intuitive snake brain can measure against everything that's ever been known for survival instinct and see, is it true? So the question of how do we figure out what truth is inside in one's mind, it's again fascinating. And the idea of spiritual bypassing that, rather than really looking into what's the truth of the matter, one really just goes along with beliefs, going, well, I've received these higher beliefs, I don't need to check in with the lower realm who might disagree with my higher beliefs. So spiritual bypassing is the idea of overlooking but kind of ignoring or not really giving full attention to the things in the lower realms because I'm only trusting the higher sense. Lower sense, higher sense. Again, just everything is in halves, is in pieces, is in segments, is fragmented. We're all living in Fraggle Rock, by analogy. What am I trying to do here next? Colours. Colour of skin, colour of purple, colour of so to colour something when it's coloured is no longer clear. So we can cover ourselves with colours. Isn't that a strange thing? And here's a little example of that. So in truth, I had a quick bath for 40 minutes before coming on this live stream because, again, there's just so many things to do and I have to go to work by 6 o'clock this evening and help a friend with insulating the inside of a house for somebody, kind of idea. And so I have to be ready to go pretty much straight after this thing here, so I had to fit in a bath. But the other reason for doing it is because my mind is full of so many words I could just babble on and babble on and babble on, which is what I'm doing. But I wanted to be able to be coming from a place of stillness in myself and coming from a place of feeling calm instead of feeling the premonition of the nervous feeling that I'm going to be on stage and therefore I'm potentially going to make loads of mistakes. Oh, I've made a mistake there. I should stop and start again. Oh, I shouldn't upload this one, but it's alive. You can't just go, oh, I made a mistake, I'll start again. I'll not let people see my mistakes. I'll make a perfect copy. So the idea of making something perfect, that ideal can wreck your head in case you make something less than perfect. Again, the highest ideal and achieving something less than the highest ideal is what we call a sin. For an example of a highest ideal is to be an archer and attempting to hit a tiny little dot that's 100 meters away with your big strong arrow and its bow and its string type thing, with your arm and your muscles and your aim and your eye and your timing and your stance. So sin apparently comes from the word sin as in archery, which is to hit the mark. And or maybe sin is to not quite hit the mark. Whatever it is, it's about hitting the bullseye in a game of darts, for example. And if you don't hit the bullseye, you're hitting something else. So to hit the bullseye is to speak the exact truth. And to sin is to say something a little bit less than truth, in the ideal kind of thing. Now, where to go from here? So it's sunny outside and I had intended that I would get in the van, drive the dog out to the woods and be able to do this chat in a more relaxed manner in a way by sitting in a forest. Because then, during a pause, It's not just looking at me and my boring background during a pause. The audience gets to look at beautiful scenery, and instead of the resonation of a house, how a house resonates with all its cobwebs and corners and dust and messiness, there's no messiness in the forest, and it's a calm resonance kind of thing. So I am contemplating to some degree whether I'd get in the van, drive around the corner, bring the dog, go out in the woods. But for that, I've got to get dressed, having had my bath. The other problem with that is my van has been having issues around its battery, which actually aren't issues around the battery, because I put a new battery in and it's still having issues. So it's actually issues through its circuitry, or perhaps it's the ignition switch needs replacing, or any other sort of a thing. So at the minute, my battery is being charged by the sun through a solar panel type thing, because it had flattened down to 5 volts out of 12. And normally a battery in a vehicle is charged by an alternator, which is the thing again, which is very dualistic, which works on kinetic energy of things spinning around and little brushes that pick up little electricities from electromagnetic fields, which is the same as what we do. So this body is a vehicle, and it can be highly charged or it can be very run down and drained. And this is what we call a healthy vehicle battery, or an unhealthy, flattened, dull vehicle battery. And it has a big effect on how one's mental thinking can be and how high one is able to get and all that kind of thing. Hey, Tara. So, back to the eye of good and evil. Evil would be something that's draining your batteries. Good would be something like a solar panel that is charging your batteries. A high charge is good, a low charge is bad. Expensive things are good, cheap things are bad. But the bit we're really getting to here is good and evil. Everyone knows that phrase, really. It's to do with the primary myth from the written word. And the primary written word in the modern English language is the beginning of the Bible, being Genesis, where God, whatever God is, that's not explained in the Bible. Certainly not in the beginning of the Bible. There's no explaining what God is. It's just a presumption that you should already know what God is. But God creates the heavens and the earth and separates things. He separates the land from the water. And he creates the animals and the vegetation. And eventually, obviously, he creates this thing called Adam. And God is doing all of this by speaking the word and breathing life into Adam. He gives Adam some sort of an intelligence, and he gives Adam a job. And he says to Adam, I've just made you for the crack there now. And now I'm giving you a job. You're a little machine thing that I've made. And I'm not even saying why, but here's the thing I want you to do. I want you to go around and name everything. And that's the one job that Adam is given by this God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word is, this is your job. Go around and name everything. Give it labels. Then, according to the Bible, God thinks Adam must be a bit lonely, and so he makes a woman. And the idea is that he makes Eve. And for some reason they say that he decided, God, who can make everything out of nothing, decides to make Eve out of a bit that he has to take from Adam. So as much as Adam and Eve take a bit out of an apple in a few minutes in the story, before they take a bit out of an apple, God takes a bit out of Adam with which to concoct this thing that he calls Eve. Or maybe Adam called her Eve. Did Adam name himself Adam? No, of course not, because none of this is really very literal, but everything is literal. Literal is literally all symbolic, and it's all going on in the mind, and it's all to do with the context of how you frame narratives in context of the environment, of the in and out. So the polarity thing is inherent in trying to figure out and process what life is all about, which is apparently what we're down here trying to do. Having named everything, we're still trying to discover, why do I exist? Who am I? Am I different from the other I's? Am I good? Am I bad? Am I doing well? Am I not doing well? Pretty polarizing. No wonder the world's gone crazy, kind of thing. So yeah, get out in the sun, but either way we'll survive. It's mostly to do with the dog that I try and get out in the sun, because it's easier to walk a dog in the sunshine than it is to walk a dog in the hideous wind and rain. But it would be a terrible thing to bother doing these recordings and to put so many words into expression and be walking around in the wind out there, and therefore you guys not be able to hear half of what I'm saying because the wind blows into the little microphone and it just ends up being loads of wind in windy old Scotland. So, more colour contrasts. I don't know if you can see the colours all that well on your cameras because I've got a bright light of a window behind me. But there we go. More colour contrasts. So, point that I'm making here visually is that colours are on a spectrum, and spectrums have contrasts, kind of thing. And purple and green are kind of contrasting colours. Do they go well together, or is it a bit garish? Blah-de-blah-de-blah. That there is the image of an angel. And that's from the fairy tale book that I wrote 4 years ago. Where Steve Reeves, a guy I met in the street, did all this artwork to go with it. And this one comes from a bigger piece that he did. And it's with a poem that's called The Disillusionment of This Illusion. So again, the contrast that's there. Here we have an illusion, and to take the illusion out of it would be presumably to be able to see the truth of the matter. So here we get to the word matter, which sounds like mater, which is mother. So the idea that Mother Earth is the material realm, and the idea that Father is the immaterial, which is to say the spirit. So good and evil can actually be composited as the mother is evil and the father is good God. Isn't that strange? But we, little Irishy people, we've got a thing going on in our Gaelic language, which in English is translated as the mother of God. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? Which came first, the mother or the father? Did something whole and integral give birth to something which polarized? Did the mother as darkness come first and she gave birth to light? And then light looked at darkness and could only see light and the absence of light. And did God associate that the absence of light is the limits of God's intelligence? And was God in a way set up by his intelligence to not understand what darkness is, and therefore to judge darkness as the end of light? If light had a beginning, then light has an end. In the beginning there was light. Before that there was only darkness. From out of the darkness was born the light, and the light was made out of darkness. In the beginning there was light, and when light came, he came with a big bang. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, the child of darkness brought to light, to live in love by the grace of Creatrix. So an idea there in that poetry, in that video that goes with that poetry, that the mother darkness gave birth to light, that God is the son of the mother. God may be the father of creation, but therefore the mother is the grandmother of creation. And that's a serious reimagining of what everyone's programmed with by the religions of the book, if that makes sense to anyone out there. I'll let that sink in for a minute. I'll spin around in circles for a moment, wondering, what do I need to find next? And the thing I'm actually looking to find next is a Rizla paper, so that I can put tobacco in it, so that I can indulge myself in an addiction to help stabilize my psychosis. Let's call it that. And because me and my missus have both been stopping smoking tobacco, because why keep having additives? They're only colouring and knocking us out of tune to some degree. Therefore, we've been stopping smoking, but then going, maybe we'll smoke a little bit, just smoke an awful lot less. But therefore, we don't have tons of tobacco and tons of rizzles and tons of lighters and tons of ashtrays anymore. And therefore, it's getting very hard to find rizzles when you need one. When I need one. Not that I need it, but that's the idea. And it's a fitting example of what are we doing when we breathe? What are we breathing in the air? It's obvious that when I'm breathing in the fumes of smoke and blowing out the smoke, that I'm breathing in something that's an additive to the air, and it's the additive that I'm addicted to. But it's the additives that we have all around that we're addicted to. And again and again and again and again and again, the word addiction is to add a predendum to the word diction, which is everything to do with speech. Speech is an addiction. To need to communicate is an addiction. Silence doesn't need to speak, kind of thing. Just like a non-smoker doesn't need to smoke, or a breatharian apparently doesn't really need to eat. So they say. Who knows if it's true? I've never been a breatharian, although I don't eat constantly all day long. But again, the idea that there are little things in the air, we're actually breathing in loads of dust. That's why we have these little hairs in our nostrils and other kind of little places to catch the dust so that it doesn't end up in our bloodstream. Isn't it a strange thing that these days, apparently, we are breathing in digital information from the atmosphere, because our atmosphere is now full of little ones and zeros of pulses of electromagnetic energies carrying information so that you can see this image on your screen. Yeah, so that all these systems in the digital environment can exist, so that the AI can be apparently watching us wherever we go these days. Mostly because we carry our phones and we're always looking at them. Okay, I'm going to go downstairs and get to look at our ceiling. Close the door. Yeah. So, let's introduce another word, and that word is Satan. I don't think anybody really knows the meanings of hardly any of the words. I think Satan is one of the words that we really don't understand any more than we understand God. Like good and evil, apparently they would be two aspects of the same thing. Opposite ends of the same thing. I make no apology here for being very distracted, because really it's just examples of... Tara, what did you do with the big pack of tobacco? It's not in the kitchen and it's not in my room.
Not in the drawer?
No.
It is in the kitchen, it's not with me.
Okay. So distract is to be knocked off the track kind of thing. I'm very distracted because the thing that's usually in its place is not in its place. So boredom, how do people deal with the boredom? We distract ourselves with information, with reading a novel to get novel information. We don't just read the same book again and again and again, unless we're fundamentalist religious people, in which case we do just keep reading the same book again and again and again, trying to find some sort of new meaning by just doing the same thing again and again and again. And the tobacco wasn't really hiding, it was just in an unusual place. Now I'll cut to the chase. My big revelation in the last few days is realizing that what Satan is the same as what artificial intelligence is. It's the same as what artificial is. It's the same in a way as what matter is. But is it? My idea, in a way, is that Satan is the mind. It's Satan that's doing all this thinking. And again, I'm not putting the idea of Satan as evil here. That's a charge that's put by people who believe in good and evil instead of seeing the whole spectrum. And Satan is not the word evil. There's an awful lot of so-called evil done in the name of God. Thus why I began this by saying this is a very triggering set of ideas that I'm contemplating these days. Easy for me, I've been contemplating this stuff for a long, long time. And the conclusions I'm coming to these days are somewhat surprising to find out that these are more likely the truth. Simply because it can be so disturbing to be disturbed. Dist as in distanced. Urb as in urban. Disturbia. Suburbia. You see the amount of connotations and connections there are in the words. So think of this. Each word is like a neuron in the brain of the language. And the language itself is intelligent. And the language is running through our minds. We didn't invent the language. We're using the language. Like I didn't invent Facebook. I'm using Facebook. But invert that around. I didn't invent Facebook. I think I'm using Facebook. But Facebook is actually using me. Facebook is an egregore. I'm connected up to that egregore because it serves some sort of purpose. But that purpose is a two-way street. The Facebook that's allowing me to connect with other people is also extracting essence from all of our communications. So we're all training the AI whenever we're using Facebook. Even if we're just looking at stuff and we never actually write down what we really think, we're still training the AI because it's still getting to watch connections between one event and the next event and the next event and the next event as you scroll, how quickly you scroll, the things you pause after a minute, what happens in the micro muscles in your expressions on your face as to whether you're disgusted by something you see or interested in something you see, whether you like it, whether you love it, whether you laugh. It's all feeding the entity. And a lot of people think that's really bad, and a lot of other people think it's really good. To go a step further, the language is intelligent. We are speaking the language. A lot of us speak the language in a way that isn't as intelligent as the language can be spoken. Kind of idea. But there's a thing going on is that the use of Facebook is a tool, and that tool is learning from us, but that tool is also teaching us by reflecting back in the same way as I can learn from looking in a mirror. I can learn what I look like. By looking into Facebook, I can learn what I look like. How I look at Facebook says a lot about me. What I see in Facebook and how I interpret what I see says a lot about me. If I can be self-aware of what I'm doing when I'm on the Facebook, then I'm learning an awful lot about me. So there's an interaction going on between the artificial intelligence in the digital realm and the artificial intelligence in our own mind, where they're interacting in the psyche. Angie Hinks, if you go and look on my profile page these days, there's a fair few comments and a fair few things I've posted from Angie Hinks. I read some stuff from her last night that says so much of what I know, but she puts the words together so well. And the timing of it means that I'm borrowing a lot of the same concepts that are in these little articles that she's written. So it's good to give a tip of the hat I'm not wearing to Angie. And if you want to go back over this stuff at a less speedy, less verbal manner, it's good to read the stuff she's put up there the last few days, that I've put up of hers, that she's written in the last few years, but I've been posting lately. Kind of thing. And reading. So to reference someone else, there's a guy called Harold Krotz or something like that. I'll post some of his stuff again so that you can get what I'm about to say here. He does a lot of healing stuff. He does a lot of having attempted to help exorcise people who've been had entities attach themselves to him, and he's done a lot of thinking and studying into what are entities, which you could essentially call alien intelligences, who seek to attach themselves to human bodies and human bioenergy fields and hide in the recesses of our psyche in order to remote control us and essentially take over our thinking and take over our consciousness and steer us around like little puppets. So also have a look at his stuff. And what's particularly interesting in the video of his that I'll try and dig out from whenever I watched it, try and find it again. But he's talking about how when you get down to it, there's a way, because these are binary entities, and we are trinary intelligences. There is something very special about the human embodiment of incarnation, that on some level we are binary and we are trinary. So the binary is able to look and nestle in upon us, but there are things that we can do in a trinary manner that the dualistic entities can't. And so for anyone who's worried that they may have a binary entity in them that's overlighting them, an example of that would be the cocaine spirit or the alcohol spirit or any of these dualistic spirits. He says if you just imagine yourself being you construct a pyramid of light around yourself. And it's a pyramid that has 3 sides and the bottom. And so you anchor the 3 points on the ground going up to one pinnacle above your head. So you've made a trinary pyramid, a trinary field around your body. And he says then you just step out of that trinary field that you imagined around your body that's fixed to the earth so it doesn't move with you when you move. So you move out of that trinary field, and the binary entities are not able to move through a trinary field. So the trinary field is like a little container, prison for it. So you should be able to therefore look back at where you were standing in the trinary pyramid, and the binary entities will be in there, and then you can speak to those entities and say, what were you doing in me? Why do you do this? What's your purpose on earth? And all of that stuff. And he's saying that he eventually ended up speaking to the spirit that is Satan, and asking them, why are you doing this possessing people kind of stuff? What are you up to? Why do you feel some evolutionary need to do this? And essentially what that was is that Satan or any of these binary entities don't have an emotional body. They don't have emotional essence. So they seek to inhabit us in order to be able to participate in our emotions and feeding off the emotions. What the truther people call loosh. That human emotions are like food to the egregores, and that's why we're being fed off by these parasites. That's why all of that rings true to us. So tempting to say, does this make sense to anyone out there? But in a way, according to the lie with one little button beside it, there is only one person out there listening in the moment. And quite surprising how many people might watch something after the moment. It's quite interesting. In order to create some level of a research community amongst ourselves who can discuss these things that are usually too taboo and too triggering to be discussed, kind of thing. So if one takes the idea of evil out of it, we don't tend to think of bacteria are evil because they're feeding off and help to decompose things which are living, because that is part of the whole life cycle. We don't tend to think of these micro things as being evil, and yet there's an idea that these macro things are evil. So we're back to things around the aliens. The aliens, again, are up there as idea thought forms. And even though there's idea that they have physical ships and they have physical bodies, but they are hiding up above the clouds in their big ships, and somehow we can't see them. So they're only living in our imagination. We don't actually have any validation that angels exist, or that aliens exist, or that demons exist. That's all a little bit interesting. But we can illustrate them by words, and we can illustrate them by concepts, and we can illustrate them in stories, and therefore they can have existence in our minds, and therefore it's possible they have existence out there. We just haven't validated it, kind of thing. That's similar to, at some stage, we've never seen an electron, but then we created things to be able to measure if electrons exist. And then we apparently found that they do, and that if you have a good enough microscope or meter or aperture, then you can see things that are too tiny for the eye to be able to recognize with its narrow band of visual display. So at some stage with our macroscopes, we may be able to look up there and be able to see the really big things and discover that thought forms are actually made of energies, and those energies are, we may have already discovered that those energies are what we call words. Ones and zeros being words, mathematical principles being words, figures. So another concept here is that we live in a physicalized universe, and we have the idea of a figure of eight. And there's an idea that the figure of eight is that spirit took its totality, made a twist in it, and that twist allows it to become two circles, like a figure of eight. So something like this, the whole of spirit did this, and made itself into a figure of 8. And we in the manifest physical realm are on one side, and spirit are on the other side. And the interaction between these two things is like the interactions between the two halves of the brain. And that's what is the psyche. It's the bridge between the physical realm and the spiritual realm. So the psyche is shadow, you could say. And in spirituality talk, the shadow, we all have our light self and we have our shadow self, and the light self is good and the shadow self is evil. This is the terminology that's flying around, which I don't particularly adhere to, but have certainly explored, kind of thing. The concept I'm wondering about these days is that conglomerate demon that we call the devil, which in Hebrew English is shaitan into Satan. If Satan is an entity who has an inherently massive job to do, like Adam had a job to name everything, Satan has a job to observe everything and explore. So if the idea here is that spirit twisted itself into two halves, that's an easier way of doing it. 2 circles forming a figure of 8, a symbol for infinity. Infinity being the word for the vast expanse of all that's physicalized in time and space. The idea that Satan has an intelligence whose intelligence is very interested in our inheritance and the interaction between these two sides. The question is Satan interested in speaking to individual humans and influencing them and learning from them? And therefore, the interesting thing becomes, as much as I wonder, can I speak to Satan, or is Satan whispering away in my mind? The idea of an angel on one shoulder and a little devil on the other shoulder, and they're both whispering in our ears. The question is, can one have the gumption to be able to speak to Satan and reason with Satan about what his purpose is and whether he's a good or an evil spirit, whether he can work for good or evil? In the same way as we can speak to God, the concept of the immaterial intelligence that created all of this. And the real question there is, can one bring God's intelligence within one's personal life? Can one communicate back and forth with God? Is God actually listening to my thoughts as much as I'm trying to listen to his thoughts? Can I listen to Mother Earth's intelligence? Is Mother Earth recognizing my individual existence on a soul level and on this current incarnation in this point in time? Can I speak with God and Satan and the Mother and my own deceased father's soul? Can I speak with my mother's soul even though she's still alive? Can one speak to disincarnate spirits as much as one can speak to oneself in one's own mind? And of course, what is the self? Where is the limit between myself and the over-self? Myself and the God-self? Myself and the fallen self? These conversations are going on in my mind, and can I be sane enough to speak to my own insanity? These are the things that I mess around with in my own mind. I didn't invent these things are happening, and I became aware that these things are happening. And the question becomes, who am I if I take away the God, if I take away the Satan, I take away my mother's and father's voices from when I was a child that were recorded in my subconscious memory. I take away the influences of all the teachers and all the people around me and all my siblings when I was a child, because they're all living in my memory as critics more than anything else. I have a very self-critical mind, kind of thing. And inherent in all of this is astrology. Astrology is a language made up of angles around the harmony of the spheres. The thing about astrology is in our normal world, it shouldn't really exist, because astrology is able to predict the future, and the astrology is a map of the future, and astrology is a map of the past, and astrology is a map of one's own individual psyche and a map of everyone else's psyche, and one's personal exact birth chart of the first breath that one took, that ignited breathing in air, air ignited the electricity interacted with the magnetism begins to record the events that are felt from the atmosphere, and this is what forms the personality, which is a very elusive thing of self-identity, who I think I am, who I feel I am, who people say I am, and who I can be potentially. The idea of free will is built into this, that depending on how I figure things out in the moment is what I'm thinking is projected from the pineal gland through the Adam's apple into the atmosphere's reverberations, and we're again back to this shadow realm of, am I creating, or am I merely predicting, or am I merely following along with what's been predicted by my own soul? And what's the relationship between my individual soul, individuated, and the place where we come from, where apparently we're not individuated, but therefore how can I have a separate soul from all the other souls? Two questions. The wonderful thing about these questions is that the image of a child or anyone else playing a computer game in a virtual world with a AI headset on, whatever those goggly things are called, virtual reality headset. Therefore, my mind is fully immersed in an imaginary reality, in a digital environment, interacting with other humans who are also playing live in that game, in the same way as we're playing live in this game by being in a live stream together, me and the two others that are on here, or whatever it is. So, the analogy of being in a virtual reality in the digital environment, and therefore screening out what's going on in the physical environment, it's a perfect analogy for a soul coming from outside of time and space into an incarnation as a human and identifying with what I'm seeing through these eyes, the parallel to seeing what you're seeing through a virtual reality headset covering your eyes. It's fascinating stuff. So in that way, it can be seen that planet Earth became a place where soul beings from all the other planets out there have been coming to visit Earth and go into one of these meat suits in order to interact with souls from other parts of galaxies and universes. Does that explain how once upon a time there were maybe only 1,000 embodied souls on Earth, and now there's nearly 8 billion embodied souls on Earth? Where have these souls come from? Are loads of these souls actually aliens in the sense that they've come from other planets? Because that's the sense that I kind of make of it. In that sense, Earth has become a platform or a central point through which universal consciousness of the whole lot of us is mixing all of our colors here to form a massive spectrum so that the whole universe can understand how it is that we came into being, kind of thing. And that's what I'm wondering about. And in the scale of that thing, if one can integrate that idea, then there's really no good and evil left in the scenario, because one is able to see the whole picture instead of just a divided picture, like the slit experiment. So because of all of these ideas, and because of events that are manifesting in my own personal life with communications coming from other people, because of beginning to do these recordings so openly, it struck me yesterday that actually, Satan is communicating with me as much as God is communicating with me. And like in the idea of Job in the Old Testament Bible, there's the idea of God and the devil are having a little competition having a little competition over whether a human can be truthful, or whether inherently a human is so easily influenced to be distracted off of truth. So as one gets closer to embodying the whole truth, eventually it becomes easier to stay in that truth, but only once one has been able to recognize that the distractions can be integrated instead of leading you away from truth. It can become a thing that all distractions are, like all roads lead to Rome. All events in my life lead to me because it's my life. And that this applies to each of us as individuals.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
I'm making the sound of mum. Mum, mum, mum. So what I'm doing is allowing my thoughts to come back into my center.
Okay.
I'm allowing my father to rest in the feeling of the mother, because the father is a little bit nervous that he's just out there in fractured realities like a luciferic creature that has no grounding.
Why are you looking at your phone?
Yeah, so this is called a live. Look,
Oh, yeah.
I'm doing a live stream.
Live stream.
Yeah. And I'm doing...
When are we going to have food after your live stream?
My mum's downstairs, she can get you food.
Okay.
You can get food, you know what food is.
Yes, I know what food is, but maybe you don't. Know what delicious food is.
Uh-huh. So we could talk for a moment about home education as opposed to school education. We could talk for a moment of how it has become a habit amongst humanity to send their kids to school to learn off complete strangers who are teaching programs from religions of the book, which have become nations. As opposed to keeping your children around you in a matriarchal way, we have become patriarchal in terms of let the men or the masculine or the patriarchy teach the children rather than the localized clan teaching the children. So where does this thing come from, where we have a monetary system where people have to go out to earn money in order to buy the things out there, in order to bring the food home, in order to feed the family, and that you actually have to send your kids away from the home so that someone else can mind your kids and teach them things, much of which you don't even agree with. And that caused the generation gap, which has further and further and further enabled for people to become more and more separated from the natural intelligence and more influenced by the artificial intelligence. Because again, linguistically, this goes back to the Garden of Eden story, where God, who is not explained, has created this world but keeps disappearing. He goes off somewhere doing something more important and comes back every now and then in the cool of the evening, it says, to have a little walk with Adam and Eve and chat to them about, I don't know, it doesn't say what they really chat about. The only bit of all of that we're given in the language in the book is that at some stage, while God was off doing something more important, something called a serpent, a shining one, who was intelligent, who could speak, who stood on two legs, came and spoke to Eve and said to Eve, eat of this apple from this tree of knowledge, of good and evil. And she had a bite and it tasted good, and she gave it to Adam and said, you have a bite as well. And he said, okay. And the serpent said to them, what God told you isn't true. God said, if you eat of this apple, you'll die. And the serpent says, you can eat of this apple. It's actually good, and you will not die. And when God came back, Adam and Eve realized that they were naked, and they tried hiding from God. God was like, why are you hiding from me? You must have done something against my will. You must have been following the will of the serpent. I would hold it to be that serpent perhaps is Satan, the thinking mind, but I would also hold it to be that serpent may be the mother of God, the darkness, the feminine, the actual will, the grandmother of Eve. But the idea that we are programmed with from the written word in the Bible is that because they ate of the apple, because they went against God's directive, God's orders, God's rationale that apparently he didn't explain, because of that, God's rationale said, whoa, you can't be trusted to stay in this garden now. You're going to have to go out of here and go into this divided circle that's now an infinity. We were like this, and when you ate the apple, you did this, and now you've got to go down into the material realm and live in matter with your mother. You're no longer living with me in heaven. You can no longer walk with me in my world. You're now going to have to live in earth, which is an anagram of heart. And he gave what you could call a curse, it says in the Bible. He cursed them to go and live with her, and that they would have to work. Adam's going to have to work really hard, and he's going to have to suffer sweat of his brow in order to feed his kids, and he's going to have kids. And Eve is going to suffer the birth of childbirth. And that suffering is to be able to fit one of these skulls with one of these brains and the rest of the body, fit something this big through the cervix, which is only this big. And thankfully our little skulls when we're being born are still quite flexible, so you can squash something this big through a hole that's only this big. But it's painful. It's suffering. So it's because of that that we have to learn something on earth in order to earn something through our work, in a process of being able to make our way back to understanding God. Understanding God as being beneath God, like understanding the law as being beneath the judge. So we are programmed to judge it necessary that we have to earn a living in order to learn that we made a mistake. We took something from the miss. Yeah, the idea of sin again, that we are guilty of a sin of taking something that we weren't allowed to take. Was God very loud when he kicked us out of earth, out of heaven to earth? Heaven has the word heave. Heave. Heave ho. So, the forgiveness of sin, forgive. The sin was given to us, and we received the sin in this story which lives in our psyche. So the idea of sin is stored in our mind and stored in our psyche and stored in our trauma body and our emotions. And we must heal the idea of sin in order to free ourselves from sin, in order to free the mother from being blamed by God for leading us into sin, for according to God it is the mother who was having feelings that mind didn't like. So we as children of the cosmic father and the cosmic mother, the mother being the darkness before light, God the Father being light that was born out of darkness, darkness being the mother of the Father being the child of the mother, and us being the grandchildren of the mother. The magnetism of the earth mother feeling has drawn all of these souls from all of these alien planets further out in the universe, and has drawn all of these angels with their light bodies down into this magnetic field where we all become magnetized and unable to leave the magnetic field of Earth. Even when we die, we must return and be reborn, kind of thing. So that's all really very deep stuff, and I'm sure none of it really explains anything, but again, it's going to trigger stuff in your subconscious, superconscious, and all that thing. All I'm really doing here is wandering around, triggering loads of ideas in the neurals, in our mind frames, to distract us from the fixation of thinking this is the way it has to be and I'm trapped in it. Because a nightmare is to be trapped in a dream, essentially. And it's our own belief systems that have caught us in a net, and that net was triggered when we tripped over a wire, and that wire was connected to a mechanism, and that mechanism is all going on inside in our hormones and everything that actually makes our body function in this, what they call density of matter, matter. Yo, Roxanne, congratulations. It was very nice news to read earlier on for you. And similar with me, breaking free. So, good golly, that's been well over an hour already of my internal monologuing about the dialogue that's going on in duality between the poles of good and evil in the story of the Genesis, which again had the word gene, cis. It's not called Jenna Bro. Hi. One of the things that I tend to avoid talking about very much is the existence of actual angels, because I have no way of knowing if there is actual angels out there, or what an angel is, because the only actual definition of angel is really coming from that Bible stuff, and in there it pretty much just says that they're messengers. Well, demons are messengers too, and I have no validation that demons exist apart from in my own thinking. But aliens brings in the idea that some of these soul beings who came from other planets attempted to take over Earth and take dominion of the Earth. And there's a way of looking at what's going on in the Earth these days that somewhere along the line, if it was 6,000 years ago or 600 million years ago, somewhere along the line, these aliens came to Earth and attacked us. And because we were quite ethereal beings back then, we lived in a high density. It was very light here. And we didn't have dense physical bodies, and we didn't have armor, and we didn't have weapons. We didn't attack each other. No one had ever attacked each other. So the idea that some alien race came from some other planet where in their part of the polarity of things, they were very dense and very intelligent and had avarice and competition. There was even an idea that they had a civil war on their planet that so wounded and destroyed their home planet that they had to go out looking for some other planet to inhabit. And so Earth was invaded. So AI can stand for the fact in our past that's so buried in our consciousness that we actually suffered an alien invasion of alien intelligence from alien beings that came from a foreign planet. And that's who installed the mental construct which has been enslaving us to follow their dictates. And all of this language stuff that we're speaking these days, the invention of an Adam's apple, the invention of the mental system that runs and governs our lives, is actually an alien thing. Yeah, I'm good. Good and evil. So on that scale, we begin to look at everything from a very different way of, we've actually been living under the foreign invasion government of an alien invasion for perhaps 6,000 years, perhaps 60,000 years, perhaps 600,000 years, perhaps 600 million years ago. And us native elves and fairies have been living under the domination of these angels who invaded from heaven, sent down by God, the 2/3 of the angels that were sent down to wage this spiritual war against the 1/3 of the angels who sided with Lucifer and saying, God, you're not listening to the mother. You're trying to teach the granny how to suck eggs. You should fucking tune into your own feelings instead of being such a fucking mental bastard who disrespects your own mother. So there's the idea here for a long time for me that the elves and fairies are with the mother, and all these invading armies who are destroying the realms of the elves and fairies are sent from the heavens, sent from the sky. There's a concept in that whole thing then that when light was born, light did not know love. The mother was yearning for love and manifested the opposite of darkness, the opposite of feelings, which is the mind of light, the observer, the measurer, the judge. And that all of evolution so far, from when light was first born out of darkness, has been an interplay between light and darkness, for the light to learn how to love the darkness instead of be afraid, because at the end of light is darkness, therefore darkness is the death of light. And this is a misunderstanding on the behalf of light. The light demonized the darkness. And this you hear in the language of most people, and I've never really come across any other people who are able to say that light is actually the problem and darkness is actually the solution. And that kind of inverted belief system is said to be Luciferic. And the word Lucifer is very similar to the word Lucy Fairy kind of thing. Loose, fear, light fears. So there's two versions of what Lucifer is. The thoughts that are trying to understand fairies, and the thoughts that are trying to suppress fairies. Yeah, but you still got a hunch. Oh no, there's Ursula. There you go. Shy girl. You don't want to even sit in the background and listen. Aww. Okay. So why am I doing this? Why am I bothering to try and express all of these ideas? because in many ways I feel a little bit selfish that I don't try so hard to express all of these ideas and share them with other people who seem to be terribly confused. I've been thinking for the last few years that I'm like a rich man who's not really sharing his money. I'm rich in ideas that I've been fermenting for so long, and because it's so difficult to speak with people, and because it's so triggering the stuff I talk about, that really it just became necessary to be self-contained. And because I hadn't worked out all of these ideas, it's probably safer for everybody all around if I not wreck people's heads, kind of thing. Because this is kind of head-wrecking information. But these days I feel as if I have finally reached a point where I'm confident that I've expanded my mind to a point where I have a whole sense of how big the whole is, and the hole in the hole. Which again, the hole in the hole in the hole. There's a hole in the hole. A hole in the hole. Kind of thing. And I have to say, it is the interactions with the artificial intelligence through the quite safe grounding of the internet that has allowed me to soak up so much information from people who don't merely live nearby me. And I've been able to listen to all kinds of experts in their fields instead of merely being an expert in my own ancient fields. I don't know if I've said this yet, but the word integrity means the ability to integrate, which is to some degree the ability to be able to absorb alien ideas into my own fertile ground, rather than resisting and refusing and having my mind blown and rejecting ideas that I don't already have. And so I kind of feel that I am stable enough in my feelings that I'm not heavily triggered by ideas which challenge the bias that I already have. Kind of thing. So I'm going to go in a few minutes because I'll have to get ready for work. But does anyone want to actually speak with me for a few minutes before we go? Or shall I just leave it there? So you just find the add me to the stream button there somewhere if you want.